It's that postdoc who's like, if I just get this Nature paper, everything will be okay. And either it's not going to happen, or even if you get that, everything is not going to be okay.
Welcome to Hello PhD, a podcast for scientists and the people who love them. Today on the show, we talk with a career counselor about supporting postdocs who want to step off the tenure track. Stay with us.
And we're back. This is Hello PhD, episode 27. I'm Joshua Hall.
And I'm Daniel Arneman.
And we'll discuss the human side of science and life in the lab. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Josh. I have a very special treat for you this week.
Lay it on me.
Well, you know how we normally do our ethanol section, and we have an IPA that comes kind of from the North Carolina area?
Yeah. What's new this week?
Well, we're going to do something totally wild.
Okay.
I got us an IPA from Virginia.
Oh, my goodness.
I drove through there for the Christmas break, stopped, tried to get something exotic, but the pull drew me in. So we are sampling the Missile IPA from Champion Brewing Company in Charlottesville.
Well, you know, Dan, I feel really bad for listeners out there who don't like IPAs.
They long for a Pilsner.
I'll pick up something different next week.
We'll just drink a glass of water next week, and we'll tell you it was like a Bud Light or something.
Well, this is my home state of Virginia. I haven't had any of the Champion Brewing Company. Haven't had that from Charlottesville.
It's got missiles right on the front.
It's got some missiles.
And 65 IBUs for your tasting pleasure.
7% ABV.
What do you think?
It's good. It's good. I like this. So this has some Cascade, of course, but some Simcoe and Summit and more. And
it does not have the piney flavor, the elusive piney flavor I am searching for. I want to know the name of that hop.
It is not in this one, but this is not bad.
I'm so glad that I have achieved a level of not bad in your taste test.
I will give it the Virginia bump. How about that?
Fair enough.
Dan, I am so excited about our topic and our content for this week. I'm always excited, but we're going to talk to Dara Wilson Grant this week.
That name sounds vaguely familiar to me.
Yeah, I believe you have met Dara.
So, little full disclosure background. When I was a suffering graduate student and I said to myself, I don't know what I want to do, but it's not this. I went to University Career Services, waltzed through the door, and I don't think that I think they were accustomed to dealing with a lot of undergrads from different departments. I don't think they had seen a lot of graduate students from the biomedical sciences. And so in that office, I met Dara Wilson Grant.
She was telling me about meeting you, and the first thing she said was, when Dan walked in, I did not know what to do with Dan.
Yeah,
Well, my response was, I don't know what to do with Dan either.
Every week, and you have to deal with it every week. The system was not set up for graduate students to come in there and get help. They had the Myers-Briggs test I could take and the strong interest inventory, but there was nobody really thinking or talking about what do you do with scientific training outside of the lab. And so, over the last 10 years, we've sort of figured it out, but at the time, it was just really hard. And I know Dara went on to actually work with scientists after that.
She does. And so Dara is now a licensed professional counselor, and she's associate director of the Office of Postdoctoral Affairs at UNC and a career counselor primarily for postdocs. Dan, one of the things that I found interesting was Dara actually switched careers herself.
I know it was inspiring to me at the time. She came from a background in finance and accounting, I believe. I think she worked on Wall Street.
Yeah, she worked on Wall Street for a number of years, had a great job as an accountant, but realized that wasn't a good fit for who she was and wasn't fulfilling. And so she made the decision to step off of that track and become a counselor, take a cut in pay, and has no regrets.
Yeah, so she walked the walk. And I think that was what was so helpful just in meeting her and talking with her when I was at that part of my career, was to talk to somebody who had been through it and survived it. She had made whatever sacrifices to change careers, and it let me know that it was possible and that you can find something that you would love to do.
Yep. And that is our topic for this week, Dan. That probably fairly common phenomenon that a lot of postdocs go through, a lot of graduate students go through who are in the PhD training path. When you decide, you know what, the tenure track, the academic tenure track is just not what I want to do, that can be a tough decision to come to.
Curse you for deciding that. No, but Dara wrote an article that we saw on LinkedIn. It got a lot of feedback, and the title was "Standing at the Crossroads: When PhDs Abandon the Tenure Track Career Path." It's a bit provocative of a title, but you sat down with her to ask her about how she decided to write this article and some of her thoughts on PhDs that, went for the air quotes alternative careers.
Yeah, this is Dara's day-to-day life is talking to postdocs who have had this very struggle, and I was happy to sit down and talk to her a little bit about this article, Dan. I think all the listeners out there are really going to enjoy this and really get a lot out of this. I know that I did.
My name is Dara Wilson Grant, and I am the Associate Director here at UNC's Office of Postdoctoral Affairs. I am also a licensed professional counselor, and I also have a consulting business called Careers in Bloom.
So one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about was you wrote an article that was up on LinkedIn, and it was called "Standing at the Crossroads: When PhDs Abandon the Tenure Track Career Path." What made you write this article?
That's a good question. So one of the reasons why I wrote the article is because, as we were talking before, when I started working with postdocs like 9 years ago, there were very few resources that even talked about career development in general, resources. But now I'm really excited because more and more people are talking about it. People are interested in where do graduate students and postdocs go. People are talking about, exposing graduate students and postdocs to a much wider variety of career options. But still, as a counselor, I feel like people still aren't talking about, like, the decision-making process. People aren't really talking about what someone goes through when they're trying to either, decide on the direction they should go in or whether to make a change. I feel like no one's really talking about the emotional side of making that choice to leave. No one's really talking about, like, the emotional, the behavioral, the psychological barriers that can get graduate students and postdocs stuck in their career. And I feel like I'm always talking about that every day with postdocs or with colleagues, but it wasn't something I was reading about. And I know graduate students and postdocs are talking about it amongst themselves. But I just felt like, while those other things are important, I do feel like we need more information and data about outcomes. We do, the reality is the logistics of, how do I get from point A to point B? They need to know about options. We need those panels on a variety of careers. We need to teach them job search skills. They need to learn about transferable skills. They need a skills development plan. But none of that matters if they can't even get to that point where they're ready. And I felt like that was what I wanted the article to be about.
Well, it's fantastic. Clearly, you've gotten a lot of response from it, probably on LinkedIn and elsewhere. I know I saw you had a lot of activity.
I gotta say, and I hope I don't get super emotional, but a lot of people responded, and it was overwhelming because a lot of people really disclosed a lot in terms of their own personal struggle, and it's touching to know that something that was written can make someone feel like less alone, and that was like the big theme. People felt like they at the time were the only person going through it, and I know people talk about it, but maybe not at that level. And so for someone to recognize themselves and know that other people feel that same way, I mean, that made the struggle of writing it worth it. It's interesting because people change careers all the time, right? Like, I'm one of those people. And I think in certain professions, lawyers, it comes up a lot with, it's so admirable that, the attorney gives up the big bucks to go start a bakery. But the culture of academia, I've never experienced that. Like, I'd never experienced that culture of, if you choose to do something else, you're abandoning. Like, the word abandon, and I struggled with the title because abandon has such a negative connotation, and I hope that, with the article, it wasn't about, you're not abandoning, you're just choosing differently. But that stigma and that word abandon is used so often, like you are doing something so wrong by walking away, when that is so not the case. But yeah, it was an experience. And like I said, I can relate on a personal level too, because I made a career change a little late in life, and it was tough because, you struggle with, you've been doing this for a long time. You've invested a lot of time, energy, and money. I remember my grandmother thinking I was crazy. She's like, no one works to enjoy what they do. You work to make a living. Who cares if you're happy or not? And I was like, but I need to be happy. And she's like, no, you don't need to be happy. You need to make money. So it was hard to explain to my family, who thought I had a great job, that this was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something else, and that what I might want to do would pay less, or be less stable. That was a big decision, It was a big decision, and it was not easy. And so, every time someone sits in my office and makes that choice, I feel like, gosh, that was the bravest thing to do, because I know how hard it is. And it's probably 10 times more difficult for postdocs and graduate students, because I think of the stigma.
One question I have, last week actually with the new year, we looked at an article that talked about advice from a senior scientist who was looking back on his career and offering suggestions. And one of the things he said was, if you're in the wrong place, get out. And what I wanted to know was, how would you differentiate between this is challenging right now versus, you know what, this just isn't for me, I need to leave this for good?
That's a good question. And it's funny because a lot of postdocs, when they come to my office, it's either they will say, I kind of started feeling like this wasn't what I want to do in graduate school, but I feel like, let me give it another shot with my postdoc. Maybe a different lab, maybe a different environment, maybe a different, culture that may help me to realize that, I do want this. It's hard to say because everyone is different, but I think when something is challenging, it's usually a mixture of fear and excitement, There's that adrenaline rush, and when you step up to the challenge, even though you may complain the whole way through, when you complete that task or that challenge, you're like, woohoo, But when it's time to go, you step up to the challenge, you complete the challenge, and you're still empty. It didn't matter. There was no adrenaline rush. There was no woohoo. It was just okay, I did that. And so I think it's that nagging feeling that doesn't go away, even when, by all accounts, you should be excited about something. The paper is published, you're not excited. So I think most of us know. We know. We might not be ready to deal with it yet, but we know.
That I agree 100%. That's fantastic. So you talked about, you already talked about why you think it's hard, or some of the reasons you think it's hard for postdocs or grad students to step off the tenure track. But one thing I thought was interesting with your article is you compare those emotions that postdocs face stepping off the tenure track as being similar to the grieving process.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that.
Okay, and let me say this, that I'm not the first person to make that comparison. There's lots of literature out there that makes that comparison. Usually that comparison is made with people who have been displaced, people who have been let go. There's that grieving period of, I've been working with this company for so long, or I've been this for so long and I'm no longer. And I read articles about that, but I actually experienced it for the first time when I started working with postdocs. And you could see it. You know, when they talk about the stages people go through, and not everybody goes through every stage, but you know, there's that anger phase, and I see that a lot. The angry postdoc, you know, they're just mad at the world because they're so unhappy. There's that postdoc who's kind of like bargaining and in denial, and it's that postdoc who's like, if I just get this Nature paper, everything will be okay. And it's not gonna happen, or even if you get that, everything is not gonna be okay. But then what I see a lot is that kind of depression phase when you know the end is here. You know that this is not what you want to do. But it's hard because it's like, again, I've made so many sacrifices. I put my family through so many sacrifices. Financially, I've sacrificed. I'd let people down if I walked away now. I'm a failure. That depression phase is like, it's tough, you know? And so it is a grieving period. It is a tremendous loss. You know, I mentioned it in the article, but so much of who we are is tied to what we do. I am a counselor. You know, when you meet someone, you ask what their name is, and then usually you ask what they do. And so when you've been something for so long, and for postdocs, I mean, you've been in this environment now for like 10 years, 12 years. So you've been this for so long. Who am I without it? Like, who am I? I have no idea. And I think that's what people grieve. Like, even when you're happy in the end, it's still a loss, you know? And you know you could be moving on to something better, something that's more fulfilling, but nonetheless, a lot has gone into this, and you're having to say goodbye. And I think that's difficult for anyone.
Absolutely. So, you know, we have most of our listeners are grad students and postdocs, and I know, you know, we hear from them, and a lot of things we talk about have to do with, you know, these careers and these challenges with thinking about careers that aren't the tenure track. So you talk a lot one-on-one with the postdocs at UNC, and they're super lucky to have you. But let's say we've got people listening to you right now, and this is resonating with them. What advice would you give to a postdoc who's struggling with whether or not to stick on this academic track or pursue something else?
That is a good question. My advice, I think deep down you know whether or not you want to stay or go, right? The difficult thing is, if I choose to move on, how do I do that? You know, how do I do that? And my advice would be, you don't have to like do anything immediately. You know what I mean? Take your time, work on your exit plan. You know, if you're a graduate student and you're going to finish this up, and again, it's case by case. I mean, there may be some situations where it may not be the best thing to finish it up. In other situations, it may be the best thing to finish it up. But let's just say you decide, I'm going to wrap this up, get this dissertation out. But in the meantime, this is where it's important. While you're doing that, you've got to do other things. The postdocs who I feel like have been really successful in making that transition had a long transition period. So they may come in one day and say, I don't want to do this, but typically it's like a year and a half before they actually move on. And in that time, they're holding up their obligations in the lab or wherever they're doing their research. You know, they're doing what they need to do, but they're also out there exploring other interests. You know, joining clubs or professional associations. They're talking to people in fields that they think might be interesting. You know, they're testing the waters and taking their time so that they can make a really informed decision. You never know what you want to do until you experience it. And you can't just go out there and get, you know, a part-time job doing something else. But you can certainly take steps to expose yourself to all the different things and then kind of figure out what seems like it might be a better fit. And I can give you like a concrete example of, you know, a postdoc that I worked with not so long ago, and she gave me her permission to use her story. But she decided she didn't want to stay in academia anymore. So we put together a timeline. It was going to be a year, but she had very clear and specific things that she was going to do in that year to facilitate that transition. And one of the things, just to keep herself, sane, was to get back to the things she enjoyed. So she's a vegetarian. She started a vegan blog, and she loved it. And it actually took off and won awards. And she actually now has a cookbook out. But then she got involved in like Durham Seeds and some other programs, just to kind of have that balance between, the grind and just that mental health and just doing some things I just enjoy. Funny enough, the things that she just did for enjoyment actually led to her next position. Once you kind of step up to the challenge, the universe rewards you. That's what I believe. Like, once you make that decision that I'm going to free myself of all of this and I'm going to put my energy into, finding a path that makes me happy, you get out of the lab, you start doing things, you meet people, you talk to people, things will happen. But you have to, take action. So my advice would be, have an exit strategy. Put a plan in place. Give yourself a reasonable amount of time, but do some things. Talk to people. You'll find that you'll talk to someone and realize, nope, that's not interesting at all. I thought it was interesting, but no, it's not. You move on to something else.
No, that's fantastic advice. You talked a little bit about all of the response you got from people who the article resonated with. Did you get any negative feedback or critical feedback from people within academia?
I got one negative I got one negative one that I'm aware of. There may be other negative, because what happened was people started forwarding it to other groups and things like that. So this was actually a response, a comment that was put forth to a group that the article was forwarded to. And this person, whose name I will not reveal, but I don't think she read the article. I think she read the title. And she was just like, I'm so tired of people and their negative whining, was what she said. And I'm not going to lie, I cried. And I think a lot of people are sensitive about this topic. She felt like it was bashing academia, and that was absolutely not my intention, to bash academia. What my intention was to, let people know that they're not alone, but also shed a little bit of light on, some of the external reasons why it's so difficult for people to make that shift. It's hard when you have, colleagues or PIs, saying, oh, you can't cut it, or, oh, just negative things because you want to do something different. And so, it hurt my feelings. But that was the only thing that I read. Like I said, there could be other things out there I don't know, and I don't want to know at this point. But for the most part, people were really thankful and appreciative. And those were graduate students and postdocs. This particular person was a faculty person. So I get the defensiveness, I think, because sometimes it's hard not to take it personal, I think, for faculty. I am making you in my image and you are rejecting that.
Yeah, definitely. So any last things you want to say?
I just want to say, to the graduate students and postdocs who, are just out there struggling, I know it's hard. I know it's hard because as a counselor, every day I sit and I talk to people about this, and I see the struggle on their face. As a career changer, I've experienced it on a personal level of how difficult it can be to, just make a huge shift and feel like you're starting over. But I have to say, when I look back, I have no regrets. I think that, my life as an accountant actually helped to prepare me for my life as a counselor. I feel like there are skills that I have as a counselor that other counselors don't have because of my accounting background, and I have learned to use that to my advantage. I think I couldn't have gotten to where I am right now had I not gone through this, period, I mean, you just don't know what you don't know, right? So I would say you have so much more to gain by taking that step. I am so much happier now. I am so much clearer about what I want. Making this type of change has made it really easy for me in my career to know what I want and what I don't want, what I say yes to, what I say no to. I just can't imagine, like, looking back, being a miserable accountant, like still being a miserable accountant who just, you know those people who you look at them and you say it's time for them to go. Like, you don't want to be that person. So, you know what? Give yourself a chance at finding something that's going to make you happy. I mean, it clearly cannot be worse, right? If you're unhappy. And the other thing is, if you start doing something new and you don't like it, guess what? You switch gears and you change. I mean, the statistics say, and it depends on where you read the statistics, but most people, by the time they retire, will have changed careers between 3 and 5 times. Like, not jobs, but careers between 3 and 5 times. So, this is just evolution, right?
Well, we are obviously big fans of Dara and her work. For those of you listening around the world and around the country, if you want to learn more about some of her ideas on postdoctoral training and how to change careers and things like that, she does have a website. You can find her at careersinbloom.com, where she writes a blog, and there's some great articles up there for more information, but you can also get in touch with her via that website. Again, that was Careers in Bloom. And so that's a resource that anybody around the world can enjoy.
Absolutely. I've read several of the articles, and they are all fantastic, as is the one on LinkedIn. And obviously, we will put a link to that article and to Dara's website in the show notes so you can read more. Dan, that was obviously great. Dara had so many wonderful things to say. What jumped out at you?
The first piece that really caught me was her commentary on identity, and she mentions this in the article. It's such a great way of describing how I felt at the time, and I think how we all feel. You are a scientist, and to do anything else feels like you're betraying yourself or somebody else. And I don't know, it's just so powerful to think of that I am defined by this thing that I do.
Yeah, and one thing we talked a little bit about that's in Dara's article, and she talked a little bit about it on the interview, was academia specifically has a very pronounced culture of having that identity. There's an emotional connection to that identity to the point that it becomes hard to leave behind that specific career. But I found it interesting that one thing Dara and I spoke about before we began the interview was her own career path and transitioning out of an accounting career on Wall Street into the counseling world, and how there was a period of time where she looked like and felt like an accountant because she was doing accounting things, and
her resume screamed accountant.
Absolutely. And it wasn't as easy as just, I want to be a counselor now. Okay, go be a counselor. But there actually was a year and a half of a transition time where she had to learn about being a counselor, train, take some classes, get some experience doing that, not just to get the experience to be competitive for those jobs, but just for her own self-identity to begin feeling like and identifying as a counselor.
Yeah, but then she never left behind the pieces of her identity that she wanted to keep from the accounting. I mean, she mentions, this helped me to deal with MBAs, and it helped me to deal with certain types of students. So again, and I feel the exact same way. The scientific training I have, I use that every day. I'm not pipetting, but I am thinking scientifically, and I am planning experiments. And that's something that you don't just fall into, in the business world. So it is really valuable, and it really makes us nuanced and faceted.
Absolutely, Dan. And I feel exactly the same way as you. And I think that's important for postdocs and graduate students who maybe are struggling with the idea of wasted time, that I've devoted all this time to my training. All of that's for waste if I go do something else. And that's just simply not true at all. We need to really realize what our transferable skills, all of these really useful things that we've learned in the lab that can be applied in lots of different arenas.
Yeah, you may not do a qPCR again, but you will do scientific thinking again.
Absolutely. The other thing, Dan, I thought was really, really interesting, and this did overlap with something we talked about last week, and that is knowing when it's time to go.
Yeah, I am so glad you asked her the question about what is the difference between this being hard right now and this being something I don't even want to try anymore.
Yeah, and I really wanted to know what she thought about that, because
I didn't have an answer yet.
No, that was a legitimate question that
I will now
had.
steal her answer for future reference.
That's right. She nailed it. And that is, everything has challenges, but when one key difference is when you reach a conclusion, or you overcome something or complete something in your job or in the lab or in your career, you should have this feeling of accomplishment and excitement. And if you accomplish something and just feel neutral about it, or, well, that's done.
Yeah, it was kind of formative in my graduate career, but I remember very specifically this time that I had set up an experiment. I was transfecting these cells with some new feature. I don't even remember what the purpose of the experiment was, but I had fixed them and stained them and put them on the slides, and I was going to, maybe the next morning go to the microscope and look at them. And one of my lab mates came over and he said, did you look at them yet? Did you look at them yet? I said, no, I'm probably going to look at them tomorrow morning, or, whenever. And he's like, oh, let's go look at it. And he grabbed them out of my hands and ran down the hall to the microscope and put them on. And I remember just the stark contrast between how I felt about the results of that experiment and this guy who, it wasn't even his experiment, but he had to know. And that's when I saw there are people who belong in lab and who are so motivated by the passion of discovery of these scientific principles that they can't sleep until they find out. And I realized I wasn't that person at that moment, but it just sticks in my mind that he was more excited about my results than I was.
What about now, Dan? Or how do you feel now?
Now you can't drag me away from my work. I mean, I get excited about it and I want to figure it out and I want to do it. So again, it's not because I'm just lazy or I don't care. I had to find the thing that I wanted to do.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way, Dan. And I think that's a great tip for all the listeners out there, is think about that this week as you're going into lab or you're thinking about your career. Think about what excites you. Think about what things you accomplish or what would excite you to accomplish, and really listen to that voice and that motivation.
So what should people do? If we were to summarize, here are some steps you can take. I realized for myself I'm ready to, I want to still pursue science, but maybe it's not a faculty position, or maybe I want to do something entirely different. What's step one?
Well, I liked what she said first, and that is, don't feel like you have to make an immediate change.
Yeah, that's very freeing to not think I've got to quit tomorrow and start over.
Yeah, and it's a process, and it may be a year, it may be a year and a half, but you can start
maybe 3 or 4 years for some of us.
Let's not push it.
Okay, well, it took me about that long.
Yeah, and the key is that you're moving in a direction that's towards what your passions are and what your skills are and what those things you're excited about actually are. And so if it's outreach or if it's teaching, whatever that is, identify what are some ways I can do that. Maybe just a few hours a week. Maybe you start out just reading about those things or reading about people doing those things. Then maybe you're volunteering a few hours a week. But I think what you'll find, and this is one of the things Dara talked about too, is as you start incorporating some of that into your day-to-day lab work, you're going to feel much happier, much more motivated because you're actually doing some things that fulfill you.
Yeah, it really frees up your creativity, and just taking that first step to do something that you like will help your brain. Mm-hmm. Well, excellent interview. I'm really glad that you got to talk to Dara, and obviously I'm a big fan. Should we do the etymology puzzle? I noticed she has shirked her duties and is not joining me for the etymology puzzle this week.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the reason she wanted to do this interview in her office is she's listened to the show and previous guests and did not want to be put on the spot.
Listen to them flounder. Well, as you'll recall, last week's clue was flavor compounds in e-cigarettes can cause this form of small airway inflammation, erasing some of the health benefits of eliminating tobacco. Now, I think when I read it last week, you had some ideas about the nature of this disease.
I did, Dan. I actually know at our university, there are some researchers studying the effects of some of these flavor compounds on lung epithelial cells. And I happen to know the term popcorn lung.
Oh, that is the common name of this disease. And I need the scientific name, which is going to be really tough to get to randomly. But good for you for knowing about the research. The name of the disease is bronchiolitis obliterans. And the bronchiolitis is obviously bronchioles. It refers to the small airways. Itis is inflammation. So that's where you get the small airway inflammation. Obliterans was one that I was really excited to find the meaning of because it comes from obliterate, which has two parts. There's litera, which is letter or script, and ob, which is against. So the original meaning of the word is to be against this writing, to basically to erase something, to blot it out, to take it away. And that's where we got the small airway inflammation erasing. See what I did there in the clue? Yeah. Terrible disease caused by lots of different things, not just popcorn flavoring. Though that is something that they're researching now because people are using these e-cigarettes. They add flavor compounds, including diacetyl, and it can actually cause this permanent obstructive airway disease. Not saying that cigarettes are better for you, because they're not. They're much worse for you, but there are some side effects of these new things.
So Hello PhD does not condone vaping.
I think maybe if it doesn't have that compound in it, it's okay.
We will get back to you with the flavor compounds that are okay.
Because people come to us for their health advice? I don't think so.
Next week on the show,
we'll just
the top 10 safest vaping
We'll have
flavors.
the ethanol section and the vape flavor section. Tune in.
Dan's favorite, the IPA flavor.
Yeah, so many IBUs.
Dan, did we get a winner this week?
We sure did. It was Andrew from the University of Michigan. And Andrew had a very funny email. He said, as a non-scientist who listens because my wife makes me, the etymology puzzle is my favorite part of the show.
We are not opposed to forcing your significant others to listen to the Hello PhD podcast.
Tie them down, put the earphones on. Everybody can benefit from at least the etymology section.
I fully expect on Christmas morning you were sitting around with your family and you turned on the Hello PhD podcast. Oh, wait, that was just me.
That was just you. And they threw you out the back. All right, well, let me give you next week's clue. And we will be sending Andrew his Amazon gift card.
Great job, Andrew. Thanks for writing in.
This week's clue is, this North American ungulate paws through ice and snow to reach its favorite foods, lichen and moss. I'll read it again. This North American ungulate paws through ice and snow to reach its favorite foods, lichen and moss. Remember, I'm looking for a scientific word described by the clue. Once you get it, you'll find that the literal meaning of that science word is a phrase in the clue itself. If you think you know the answer, email it to puzzle@hellophd.com, and I will randomly select a winner from all the correct responses and send the lucky puzzler an Amazon gift card.
Dan, I'm pretty sure lichen and moss is the hottest new hipster farm-to-table restaurant.
I think that was the main flavoring in this IPA today. That or diacetyl, let's hope not.
Well, thank you, everyone, as usual, for listening to this show. I had a great time. If you'd like to suggest a topic for a future show or comment on something we've talked about in the past, you can email us, podcast@hellophd.com, tweet at us at hellophd, or connect with us on the Facebook page.
Or paw through ice and snow and write your question.
Winter is coming.
Winter's coming. See you next week, Josh.
Bye.